Okay, we're back for the Monopoly Project Floating Book Reviews. As we said, the first book we're going to review is The Fourfold Kingdom of God by Gerald Paul Paul Kooyers. Yes, two Pauls, not in the book title, but in his bios and such. And you can see I have some notes here because this is a fairly serious book, and so you can see the notes in the review. And this book is about theology and physics. The Kooyers is a physicist, has some connection to Stanford. That's where I got the book recommendation. So I decided to read the book, and I was really looking forward to it. And I got to tell you, I was disappointed. I really wanted to like this book. I really wanted to find some unique insight between the scriptures and physics, even if it was pure speculation. It would be interesting to see that, and I have a lot of speculation on Christianity and physics and how they tie together and what the real world is and what the real world isn't. And I was expecting more. I was expecting a deeper connection to the two. Before I go into the summary of the main argument, as I followed it, I want to talk about numerology. I'm going to talk about numerology later. I have an interest also in numerology. And there's obviously a lot of numbers in the Bible, but it's just one example in this book where I think the author was stretching it. He gives the example of Peter catching 153 fish when Jesus comes and tells him to throw his net in, and everybody wonders what that number means, 153, and it is a crazy number. Kooyers goes on to say that it's 3 times 51. He's factoring it now. 3 times 51 times, and of course 51 is 3 times 17, so it's 3 times 3 times 17, and he adds these up in some crazy way and finds some significance in it, which I don't think is true. But anyway, as a summary of the argument, at least as I can tell, again, it's Fourfold Kingdom of God. The author compares the 4 elements of the tabernacle that are described in detail in the Old Testament with the 4 main elements of man: body, soul, and spirit, which is biblical, but he adds a new 4th element to make it 4, apparently, is heart. The body, the body is the new tabernacle. When Jesus came, he overturned the past covenant, and the new covenant is that the tabernacle, God now dwells within us, our bodies. And so that part is straightforward. But then he goes off onto physics, wave functions, quantum theory, and a theory of now, all capital N-O-W, by a Professor Richard Muller of UC Berkeley, who I guess was either his advisor or somebody he studied under. And so, I mean, that's how I followed it. I'm going to go into some details. The first 13 chapters, with the exception of chapter 9, which discusses nonlinear equations, but the first 13 chapters could have been written by anybody. There's no physics in it, and like I said, I was looking forward to having something that had the intersection. Like I said, the first 13 chapters, are just the Old Testament tabernacle, fourfold, and all that stuff. And then when he does finally get to physics in chapter 4, he doesn't really tie in what I was expecting. Again, 4 things, the 4 forces in nature that we have discovered, as humans and physicists, the gravitational, electromagnetic, the strong force, and the weak force. He doesn't mention that. He doesn't really go into the 4 space-time dimensions, although later he goes into he does discuss that later in the Muller speculation. But then he goes off on this obscure history of Spanish conquistadors and their fights against the indigenous people, and why this was God ordained. One thing he does, and this is where I finally started something I liked, is he does acknowledge or state that God exists also outside our 4-dimensional constraints. And to me, I've always, getting back to what I said earlier about looking for speculation, I've always thought that, speculated myself, that's the answer to miracles, that if God exists outside of the 4 dimensions, space and time, then of course he would exist in other dimensions, and miracles such as walking through walls and walking on water would then be not miracles. He was just going into the other dimension and doing things that you can easily do if you have that ability. He makes a lot about quantum physics and free will, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and the wave function, how you can't pin down position and velocity. Again, that's pretty common speculation, and so I didn't really see anything. And then he goes into this detailed discussion of Professor Richard Muller's now theory, and apparently I couldn't quite follow, I got to be honest. There are actually 3 time dimensions, the one that we experience, time, but there's also time forward and time backwards, which I got to admit, I didn't really follow where Muller was going or where Kooyers was going to try and tie this in. So, I don't really recommend the book if you're a physicist, as our new vicar at church is. He studied physics, because there's really, I didn't find anything interesting or new speculation, and he didn't quite tie the 4 thing in as I thought he would. I thought he was going to go into some heavy-duty numerology, and he didn't. But I did want to discuss numerology because it's of interest to me, and numerology is defined as, at least by Wikipedia, which I have some issues with Wikipedia, but it's good for basic information. Wikipedia defines numerology as: numerology is a pseudoscientific belief in a divine or mystical relationship between a number and one or more coinciding events. It is also study of the numerical value of letters in words, names, and ideas. It is often associated with the paranormal alongside astrology and similar to divinatory arts. And one of the reasons why I picked that is because it talks about divination, which the Bible definitely condemns in the Old Testament. There are a lot of links to numerology. A lot of people, both crazy and not, have tried to discover stuff in the Bible through all the numbers that are tied together. But I did want to go off on a tangent to something that was attributed to French author Max Aurel. That's his pen name. His actual real name was Leon Paul Blouet. In his 1901 love manual with the incredibly romantic title of Her Royal Highness Women and His Majesty Cupid. It also was attributed to Nation of Islam founder Elijah Muhammad, that at the age of marriage a woman should be half the man's age plus 7. So as an example, at 24, that would be 24 divided by 2 is 12 plus 7. So the woman should be 19 if you're the man and you're 12 and you're 24. At 32, it would be 16 plus 7, which is 23, which is coincidentally the ages when Michelle and I met. I was a little over 31 and she was 23. So it does work out. Anyway, you get the idea. So it's sort of interesting speculation. In fact, it even came up in that xkcd.com comic strip, which I really like. You can see it right here, and it'll be in the review. But one of the characters mentions the formula, and so again, I find that interesting. But if you do go into the Bible, there are a lot of numbers. It's especially in the Old Testament, they use a lot of numbers, and of course the numbers in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, aren't meant to be exact like we do. They were more ideas, and big numbers were big and little numbers, but there's obviously a lot of numbers in the Bible that have a lot of specific meaning, or meaning in the terms of God. Obviously 3 is the Trinity. 7 is the number of perfection, because God created the universe in 7 days. He did it in 6, and then he rested on the 7th. And it's also 7 brides for 7 brothers, 7 wonders of the world, and all that kind of stuff. So 12 is the 12 months, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 apostles. And actually, as one of the definitions, 4 represents universal truth, as in the 4 directions, north, south, east, west. And the 4 winds, Matthew, Revelation, I'll talk about that. Matthew 24:31, Revelation 7:1, Revelation 28. In Acts 10:11, a sheet with the four corners symbolizes the gospel going to all the Gentiles. It's when God reveals to Peter that all food is clean, and which is basically saying that all Gentiles are clean also. We got a mother duck over here. Let's see if you can see it. A mother goose with her gooselings, so they're going up to try and get away from us. Hopefully I captured that. I had to, I didn't have the viewfinder because I was going the other way. So anyway, my favorite number in the Bible is 40, because 40 is the number of testing. Jesus is tempted by the devil in the wilderness for 40 days. Jesus stays on earth 40 days after his resurrection. The Israelites wander in the desert for 40 years. Moses serves Pharaoh for 40 years, and then he's 40 years in exile. Then he frees the Israelites, leads them out of Egypt, and wanders in the desert for 40 years, as we said above. And then Moses was actually on Mount Sinai talking to God for 40 days when they made the golden calf and sinned. And Noah's reign lasts for 40 days. So 40 is the number of testing in the Bible, and so that's my favorite number in the Bible. But I mentioned divination in the beginning, that numerology is a subset of divination, and there is a caution, and lots of cautions in the Bible against divination and appealing to other spirits. And so the one counterexample of that is in Revelation 13:18, where Revelation 13:18, where he calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for this is the number of man. That number is 666, and so we all know the 666 number. So there is a caution against divination, but there's also this obscure reference that we all know what 666 is, and we don't. So in any case, that's the Monopoly Project Floating Book review of Gerald Paul Paul Kooyers' book on Fourfold Kingdom of God, speculations of theology and physics and what does it mean. Thank you, and we'll now go on to our next book.